Hi, guys. Today we're talking about being worthy of the proof. Have you ever heard this saying, the proof is in the pudding? What that means is you will not know what's inside until you take a bite. Now, I'm not scared about taking a bite of pudding. I mean, most puddings are pretty sweet, right? But I am scared about risking much with having no idea what the outcome will be. And that's so much like the proof is in the pudding, right? Sometimes when we're talking still about kind of new beginnings and stepping out with God, we have to step out without knowing what's going to happen. I'll never know what God has in store for me until I actually reach out and grab it, right? And so, as we're talking about new beginnings, a lot of times they're just not as sweet as pudding. In fact, like they can be completely bitter to the first bite. And what I mean by that is sometimes it's like when God tells you you're not supposed to take a promotion because he has something better for you, or something that you're having to let go because he's wanting you to move on from, or maybe an old lifestyle you have to let go of, or maybe you have to partake in some counseling and dealing with some past pain that you just don't want to go into because you have to open up all those wounds to start healing from them. And a lot of times that first bite can be bitter. But we're talking today about having it become an acquired taste of being able to open up our lives to those new beginnings. So, how do we know if a new beginning is from God? Well, a lot of times we kind of want to push our own desires on God. Anybody else like force him to take your own desires? I knew a woman years ago and she was really involved in our women's ministry, and she was just kind of involved in everything. And all of a sudden she just said, hey, I need to go to another church. And I was like, well, but why? Like, God is really has you here and you're doing a lot of great things. And you just told me you felt called like just recently. And it wasn't about 6 months later after she left to this new church that you found out that she was chasing a guy who was going to a different church. And when that relationship broke up, she came back and said, okay, like I'm ready to step back in and take back all my old leadership. And having to have those tough conversations of understanding the difference between our desires and God's desires, and how we can't force our desires on God. You see, how do we know if a new beginning comes from God? Well, first of all, we have to match it up to the character of God. There's a series of questions we can go through, but part of that is just digging into the scriptures and go, does this look like Jesus? Does it harm people? I don't think Jesus would want me to harm people. Does it break my word? I really believe my word's my word, and I think that Christ would want me to keep that. Or has God given me a peace about it? Or do I feel really unsettled in my spirit? There's so many other questions we can ask ourselves to really make sure that when we branch out and do something new, that it's what God's calling us to. But one of the biggest things we can do is have a mentor in our life that will speak into our life and tell us what's really up. I mean, that person that will say, hey, like what you're doing is for you and only you. You're actually, it's kind of hurting people around you, or you're kind of putting to the wayside things that God's really actually called you to. Like those types of people will speak life into our life. And so being able to lean into the character of God and being able to lean into people that are also leaned into the character of God and that will make sure and tell us the truth. You see, it'd be so lovely if everything we did in life, if all of our desires just matched up with God's, right? Oh, that's my desire, so it must be God's desire. And sometimes we have that thought pattern, but it's really not like that, right? In fact, I'm so thankful that all those prayers and all those desires that I've wanted throughout my life, that God didn't answer a lot of them, or didn't call me or let me go in certain directions. And I look back and I'm like, Lord, I'm so thankful that you're more concerned about my future plan than you are making sure I get what I want in the moment, right? You see, there's this verse, Jeremiah 29:11, and probably just hearing that, it's on picture frames. You walk into any Christian bookstore, it's all over the walls, it's everywhere, right? And it says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. Man, that's like sweet to the taste, right? You're like, oh, you love me. You want to prosper me. You have plans for hope and future for me. I mean, it just sounds great, right? But if we understand where this scripture came from, it may not be so sweet to the taste. In fact, it holds a little bit of bitterness in it. And what I mean by that is Jeremiah was written by the prophet Jeremiah. And during this time, the Jews were captive in Babylon. Now, as you know, as typical with the Old Testament, The Jews were kind of going through this process where they would follow the Lord and they would get out of captivity, and guess what? Right back in, they'd fall away from the Lord and they'd get back into captivity, and then they'd follow God and get out of captivity. And they were just kind of going through this cycle. And here they are in captivity again, and some false prophets have come their way and made promises that momentarily God was going to release them from being captives. And so, of course, they were fan favorites and everybody loved that. And then here comes Jeremiah. Now, he's actually a true prophet. And so he's going to say what God's laying on his heart, even if it's not popular. So right before this verse 29:11 that we just talked about, here's what he says. He says, "This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place." Okay, back it up. Can you imagine what these people are hearing? Somebody just told us that momentarily we're going to be, released from captivity. And now you're telling us it's going to be 70 years, like a whole generation? I imagine some Rotten Tomatoes were totally thrown his way, right? Because they're thinking there's no way. Like God says, you're going to prosper us, because that's the next verse. It goes on, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future." In captivity? Right? Anybody else go, this does not match, right? You see, Jeremiah was really unpopular for speaking these words, because this time of when they were in captivity, the kings were like super bad. I mean, like child sacrifices kind of bad. So being in captivity was rough. And here God was telling them that it was going to be a while longer, 70 years. But new beginnings take all shapes and sizes. You see, I really want to tell you today that sometimes new beginnings can simply be a mindset shift. I haven't known people, I've heard of people that have been in jail, and they just have this mindset shift where they accept the Lord, life changes for them, and all of a sudden their ministry becomes that jail. They're leading people to the Lord left and right. I've known women who have made a mindset shift that they were no longer going to sit in bitterness over the fact that their husband was unsaved and would never come to church with them. The anger and all that was sitting in, and they said, "Oh, I need something new, Lord. I need something fresh." And all of a sudden, they adapt this mentality that they are going to be a powerful praying wife, and stand firm on the fact that someday they would see their husband come to know the Lord. You see, captivity takes on all different forms for us, right? It could be somewhere where we just don't want to be, and we really feel like God should just pick us up and put us over here, right? Put me in the wildflowers. Like, that's what that Jeremiah verse 29:11, it makes us sound like we're going to be holding God's hand, skipping through valleys of beautiful flowers. But it's not always like that, right? Sometimes God keeps us where we need to be, but at the same time, he is so focused on making sure that maybe we're not rescued, but maybe we're pursuing this journey with him, even if it's right where we're at. You see, he is so concerned about the foundation, and sometimes where you're at, it can just be a mental shift to embrace a new beginning. You see, no matter your current circumstances or where you may be, a mindset shift cannot happen without acknowledgement that God is always fighting for you. Because Jeremiah says, by the way, you're going to be here for 70 years, but by the way, God's fighting for you. He knows the plans he has for you, plans to prosper you. Now let's just stop there. Did you know the word for prosper in the Hebrew is shalom, which actually means wholeness? So this whole idea, when we grab a hold of this verse and we're like, oh Lord, like you're going to give me the car I want, or the house I want, or the bank account I want, or the man I want, or whatever it may be. No, God is so much more concerned about wholeness in your heart and your life. In other words, he's saying, I have plans to bring you whole. Right? And let me tell you, bringing you whole, bringing you to a place of wholeness is so much better than all the wealth that this world can offer. Jeremiah's next words, after he says this idea that plans to prosper you, not to harm you, and plans to give you hope in a future, he says, then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back from captivity. That's Jeremiah 29, verse 12 through 14. God's goal is so much more than to rescue you. His goal is to bring you alongside of him in this journey. And he says, call on me, come to me, pray to me with all your heart, and I will listen to you, and I will be found by you. You see, out of desperation for him are those moments where we just have to make that decision that we're going to taste what's in front of us, even if it's bitter, right? Even if he's calling us to do something that we just don't want to do and it's bitter to the taste, I promise you that bitterness will gradually turn into gratefulness. You see, gratefulness for new beginnings that he has provided us in our life will make you crave the newness that he has for you in the future. I'll leave you with this. Psalm 34:8 says, "Taste and see that the Lord is good." So wherever you may be and God's calling you, whether it's simply a mindset shift, taste and see that the Lord is good.